Happy holidays and welcome to episode number 30 of the Crisis Intelligence Podcast. Today is Sunday, December 28th, 2014. I'm Melissa Agnes, and this podcast is brought to you by Agnes Day. Let's talk crisis intelligence. Hi, Chris and Bruce. Welcome to the show. Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about what you do?
Well, I'm Chris Anderson, and I'm with Cyber Investigation Services. And what Cyber Investigation Services is, and we abbreviate it as CIS, is we're a high-tech services and investigation firm that helps clients gather intelligence in today's complex cyber world. So we're a boutique cyber group, and what we really excel at is finding, tracking, and reporting on hard to locate information or people for corporate law firm and professional clients. And today I have with me Bruce Anderson, who is the other co-founder of the company. Bruce?
Yes. As far as kind of my side of the world is that I'm, very involved in the technical side of the world that involves components of the technology that we see being used against folks, from cell phones to computers to hacking to eavesdropping to all the way across the board. So I kind of interface with the high tech side of it.
Awesome. And you guys you have some really, fascinating stories from the different things that you've experienced. So what can you paint a picture for, because it's very abstract, or it's very, if you don't really know what you guys do, it sounds fascinating, but not really easy to picture. So can you paint a picture of, without of course giving any details, but just some experiences that you've had or your day to day?
Sure. I'll tell you what, since Bruce and I work on such different sides, is we'll probably each give you flavors. So great example of what I get involved in. And this involves a current case that I won't give you a ton of details on, but effectively we have a financial firm that is getting attacked by an individual. This individual we believe to be a professional person that has a very serious axe to grind. And what they're doing is they're setting up websites, they're setting up videos, they're setting up social media sites, all for the purposes of trying to destroy this company's reputation, which they're being quite successful at so far. And so what we're doing is we're working hand in hand with legal teams to uncover who these people are, get them stopped, and get their damages cleaned up.
And does it make a difference? So you specified that you believe that the attacker is a professional person. Does that make a difference?
It does. We like to know if people have suspects in some of these actions. It sometimes helps in catching them, but it really doesn't matter. There's just a number of things technology-wise and legal-wise that we go through in trying to uncover who they are and prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt.
Trying to uncover who they are when they're completely trying to mask themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah. This person not only is using anonymous screen names, but is going so far as using services to try to hide themselves. And so we're in the process of penetrating those services to really uncover who they are.
Wow. So cyber investigation is really the exact term.
In that part of it, yes, it is. Bruce, do you want to give?
Yeah, I'll give an example of just a case. Again, current. It's real easy to come up with cases because we've seen so many different things. But this would be an example of a very successful company that is predominantly web-based that has someone that is stealing a major chunk of their leads, have set up a competitor site that looks just exactly like theirs but done overseas, is stealing their clients and henceforth costing them a lot of money, but they don't know how it's being done. And so they've had their entire technical team take a look at everything, and so they've hired us to come in and try to figure out how are they stealing these leads, where is it going, proving who's behind it, and then putting that case together so that they can then litigate against it. So it's similar stuff, but just dealing with different types of technologies.
Wow. You would think that if it was a duplicate website, I mean, I don't know what the service is or the business is, but if it's a duplicate website, you'd think that somebody has to be on the other side of that answering or, fulfilling the requirements, or are they only doing it to ruin the company's reputation?
No, we believe they're fulfilling the requirements as well. So we've got several angles that we're coming at it from. One is the site itself and what's going on, but at the same time, there's real money being lost on an hourly basis right now because this is a very busy site, and revenues are being lost daily while we're trying to figure out how to shut this down and make it quit.
Wow, and it seems very unlawful. So once you do determine who's behind that one, does the victim organization have a fair chance in court, or does it change things because you just said that they're overseas?
No, in this case, that they actually have a fair chance in court, but it's probably going to have to be done in the overseas court. But there's good precedent for the courts being able to support them in going after them. It's just going to be costly.
Wow. And so I know that you guys get a massive amount of calls and leads and people and organizations who need your types of services. However, I think that unless the organization has faced something similar, they may not actually identify these risks as absolute risks because they kind of feel surreal. They don't feel like, they can happen to anybody. So what are, I guess, the biggest risks that organizations are faced with today online in your area of expertise? And what are the organizations that are actually at risk of these risks or vulnerable to these risks?
Okay, well, we'll break that up into a couple of different categories. So one of the major risk areas is to the reputation and brand of companies. And these days is just about every organization is at risk for having their reputation or their brand harmed by somebody with malicious intent. So, for example, is some of the things that we see a lot where people or companies are at risk is individuals or antagonists doing things to hurt where something bad shows up in search or where something bad shows up in a review of a company. And we're not talking about just an unhappy client here. We're talking about somebody that has picked up a weapon of choice, being online reviews, and decided to destroy that company. And then obviously in the stuff that you deal with, Melissa, is in the social world. Another area that falls under what do a lot is we see all kinds of unauthorized sellers online. So many companies right now are taking their products and they're distributing them through Amazon's and eBay's or their own e-commerce site. And unfortunately what's happening is a lot of that is being harmed by other unauthorized sellers stepping up and undercutting prices. And then we also get into things like copyright abuses of images and trademark abuses and those kinds of things. Bruce, you want to address the same thing on the kind of the high-tech side?
Yeah, on the high tech side, what we see a fair amount of is some form of business interruption. So, for instance, like the case I was explaining, is that when all of a sudden your business gets interrupted and you're you're losing money and you're not sure why, and there can be a variety of ways of doing that. Both technically as well as reputationally, as Chris was mentioning. But we also see where people are trying to steal trade secrets and information, or employees leaving employment, under non-competes, but taking out, critical information that can damage the company. And so a variety of these types of things that, have to be proven technically and forensically. And today, with the use of phones and tablets and computers and such a mobile marketplace, the ways of doing it are pretty numerous.
Wow. And so how do you guys go about, I know there's probably a million different tactics that you use, but people listening are probably saying, how do you do that? How do you figure out who's behind these things? And how do you, the companies because us, people can't, or professionals who aren't cyber investigators, I don't even think that we would know where to begin determining who is responsible for these attacks and why, and then, what is at our disposal in terms of legal, aid and different things.
Yeah, and so that's a broad-reaching question. So let me just tackle one little snippet just to give an example. So in reputation attacks, what ends up happening is, even though the people do things to hide themselves, they leave trails everywhere they go. So those trails may be their IP addresses, they may be what they think are hidden emails, they may think they're hidden screen names. And what we're after in those cases is trying to find those key identifiers. So, for example, let's say, Melissa, you were my bad guy, but I didn't know who you were yet, and you had set up a blog about somebody. Then, through both investigative techniques and also us working with attorneys utilizing subpoenas, is we'd be after mostly your IP address. And once we had your IP address, then we're going to do steps to then turn that into your name. And then about the first thing that is you're going to get a knock on the door, either from, depending on whether it's a law enforcement issue or a civil issue. And so maybe somebody's sitting there on your door, getting ready to serve you a civil complaint or a lawsuit. And so that's just one example. But what happens is, and Bruce and I kind of talk about this a lot, is that in the cyber bad guy world there's just a wide range of tools. And so when we get brought into a case, given that we know where all the tools are, what can get used, is we essentially know where to go grab the right screwdrivers for this particular set of circumstances. But what doesn't work is just saying, okay, well, we always go do 1, 2, 3, and that always works. That just doesn't happen.
Okay. And when you have that, when you figured out who's behind it, what's next? Because that's one of the biggest questions, right? Is often it's the very first question is who is behind it, so that you can determine what you can do next to salvage the reputation, bring legal pursuit, et cetera, et cetera. Correct?
Yes, no, maybe. So, and again, so for example, in the reputation world, there ends up being 3 major objectives that organizations have. One objective might ultimately be to stop the person from doing more. Another objective might be to clean up the damage. a third objective might be to, and I joke, sue them to the backside of the moon. And so part of what I do when people come in the door is I want to figure out what their real objectives are, and why that's so important is going back to, let's say you were setting up anonymous blogs, there may be some things that we can do to get to your IP address and then use that to scare you to stop and remove it without having to go through all of the issues of legal and subpoenas and all that. So it's not always we're going to go sue them and hire attorneys. It really depends on what the organization is after.
Okay. And do you guys have a legal background? I mean, it seems so PI-ish, and it is. But what does the passion, or how did you get into this?
Bruce, you want to tackle that?
Yeah, I'll step into that a little bit. Part of my background is I spent several years in law enforcement, and I spent several years of doing online marketing and SEO, and actually started having clients come to us initially from a reputational viewpoint. That's how we initially got started. Was that gosh, my online reputation has been damaged. What can you do about it? And that started there, and then obviously with all the different types of attacks that we see, we grew out from there in terms of capability and expertise and ability to to tackle some of this stuff. And what we've really done is we've really kind of combined the best of technical, the best of investigative, and the best of legal. And in every case, it varies as to how much of those syllables that you actually hit. Sometimes you're using every last bit of all of them, and sometimes you as Chris said, you may just be able to reach out to someone and scare them a little bit. And so it's not there's not an exact formula for this. It's just having enough experience and understanding what you can do legally in some of these cases, and who you're up against, and how sophisticated are they, where are they at, and all of these types of things become very important in profiling who our adversary is and catching them, and then ultimately how to stop them and help the client solve their problem. And that's really what drives us: is what's the client's needs, and how important is it, and how fast does it need to be done, and then can we help them? And I think both Chris and I, from regardless of what the case is, that's kind of how we tackle it.
Very cool. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I was just going to add is, and you, I know you and I, Melissa, chat a lot, but you probably don't know this side of it, is I probably spend literally half of my day interacting with attorneys all over the country. And so in trying to develop subpoena strategies and how to catch strategies. And so some of this, on top of what Bruce is saying, is we've just got so much experience in what works, what doesn't, where you can go get information, what the attorneys need to do. Is we just play an integral role in all of that.
Yeah, it would seem like especially when you're dealing with legalities, and if the client wants to pursue and can pursue to press charges against an attacker, there's constraints there, right? Or restraints there, where you can't get into the gray zone if you want to really have as much going for you as possible in court. So go ahead.
Yeah. So I think I understand where you're headed with. So just so you know, is because of what CIS does, is every tactic that we take is, I use this line pretty much every day, is legal, ethical, and admissible in court. And so there are things that can get done. We don't get involved in them, where you can go get additional information but it's useless. Is everything that we do has this underlying tone that it may end up in court or may end up in a criminal proceedings somewhere, and so you have to pay very special attention to gathering information that way, documenting evidence for legal proceedings.
It's like the virtual sting operation.
It's to some degree. I mean, so we do a fair number of online sting operations, but that's a piece of it. Half the battle sometimes is, that's kind of the sexy TV side, the sting operations. But on the other side is we solve probably equal numbers of cases and problems by knowing exactly where, with assistance and working with attorneys, we can go get exact pieces of information that unravel the entire case.
Fascinating. So when people call you, unfortunately, they're often, I'm sure, in the midst of something. They're under attack. They're going through a crisis. They're losing revenue. They're losing reputation. Are there things that organizations can be doing before that happens to protect themselves from these types of risks, and huge risks, actually?
Yes, there is, and it's not a lot different than what you deal with, Melissa, in the social media world, but is if there's an organization, for example, in the reputation and brand that has a lot at stake, then there's a number of things that they ought to be doing. In interest of time, one of the biggest things that I would say is they have to be gathering intelligence about their brand, about their reputation on a fairly constant basis. So many of these crises, to be honest with you, can be solved in the matter of hours/days in the early stages, real early stages. However, is once you start getting into a week or 2 weeks or a month old, or worse, we have stuff straggle in 2 years later, it becomes very difficult. So number one is, and this is whether the organizations use internal manpower to do it, or whether they hire companies to do it, but is you've got to know what's being said out there about you, pretty much continually. So for most organizations is a daily looking at what's happening out in search world, what's happening in reviews, and also is, if appropriate, is what's happening in social media.
So kind of like what I'm always saying, of the sooner you identify something, the less risk it has on you, especially if you're able to respond appropriately. And then, of course, the sooner you respond, the sooner you regain control of. And in your case, responding is really working with you guys and figuring out what the strategy is, what the goal is first, and then from there what the strategy is, and then how you can move forward.
Right. Yeah. So for
go ahead, Chris. I want to add something to that.
Okay. So for example, is on that current case that I was telling you about, in the very early days, which was, call it 2 months ago, is I think we could have gotten that shut down literally in a matter of hours. However, is because it took some time, and now they had legal involved, but that all took time. It's a disaster. And so what went from a fairly modest amount of money to solve is this company's probably going to spend several $100,000 in legal bills just because they weren't prepped.
Wow. Bruce, did you want to add something?
Yeah, what I was going to add is a little different on some of my side with the technical stuff is that because when you start having issues related to computers and networks and cell phones and technology there, then preservation of that and not and responding to that quickly, being able to preserve the evidence on those, because what happens in a lot of times is people start taking their own steps and then they destroy any evidence that they might have had whatsoever. And so it's a little different, from the technical side as to how you have to approach it and what you have to preserve.
Wow. So so Chris, in your example that you just gave, you said that when the attack started, so 2 months ago, and that's because they didn't contact you guys 2 months ago, that they made all those mistakes?
That is correct. Now, in fairness, they didn't know we existed. And so but yes, if we were guiding them right from the start, remember I gave the example of maybe being able to get an IP address and scaring the individual. Mm-hmm. I think this case was wide open to doing that. And at that time the person, number one, didn't know what they were doing. And number two, only had a blog about them. And so I think we could have probably shut them down very quickly. However, as somebody starts to do this, and usually on my side it's not necessarily always a crime, but I say it's a crime of passion. So it's usually somebody is upset about something and now they're going to go do X, Y, Z. And when they first start out, usually they don't know what they're doing. And they're the most catchable and the most stoppable. But within 2 weeks, this individual shifted gears, really learned what they're doing, learned how to hide themselves, and is now spraying damaging information everywhere that is going to take court orders and lots of lawyers running around both US and UK and all this to clean up.
Wow. And that's also, it's very relentless. I mean, when you think a crime of passion, you think in the heat of the moment and, and then you get your fix and it's over, hopefully. This is something that just continues to escalate.
In a lot of these cases, they do, is for somebody to take these steps, especially against a major organization where they know that legal is going to get involved, they know the organization has enough money to hire legal, then what essentially has clicked in their head is I'm upset enough that I'm going to destroy you. And when that clicks, then it isn't going to stop gently, usually. And so, for example, is Melissa and we see a lot of issues with employees and ex-employees. So if you had an employee and all of a sudden maybe you terminated them or whatever didn't work out, and they went away and they think, you know what, I am just going to take out Agnes Day. I am going to show these SOBs that they can't do this to me. And oh, by the way, is I think I know what I'm doing. I watched a YouTube video one night, and I think I know how to hide myself. And now you are in their crosshairs, and they're not stopping until somebody makes them.
Wow. So that said, what are the biggest mistakes? And I'm sure there's many on different, the preventative side and the reactive side, but the biggest mistakes that you see organizations make in relation to all of this?
Probably the number one mistake that I see is consulting people and professionals that don't have experience in this. So or don't have a lot of experience. So normally, when things like this happen to a real company or a real organization, is what do? You turn to your attorney and go, help, what do we do? But given that their attorney probably has absolutely no experience in this kind of thing, what we see is misstep after misstep after misstep, and worse is wasted time. So if you're an organization and you have a lot at stake, and something like this starts happening, is get somebody on your team ASAP that deals with this on a daily basis.
Wow, that must be hard to find, though. Well, I mean, especially because most people, I mean, you guys are there, but most organizations, most people just don't know that, one, that this is really a real risk that they're vulnerable to, and two, not to go first to, their general attorney who does all of their legal proceedings and work for them.
It is. It's counterintuitive, and so part of what we're trying to do is we're trying to educate not just the organizations themselves, but also general counsels and other attorneys, is that there are resources out there like us where they can go get help quickly. And fortunately for us, and it's why our business is growing, is more and more people do know our name. And so we get all kinds of people where their attorneys have heard about us and they say, all right, first call, go call those guys. And that can help.
Good. And you mentioned, time, the longer it takes time often, and too much time often, to figure out the right step. And the right step is often to, call somebody like you guys that can help them absolutely figure out what their goal is, figure out the strategy, and take the next steps. The other thing, not just time, but statute of limitations comes into play, doesn't it? Often?
If the case is going down legal paths, yes, statute of limitations can come into play. So, for example, in the U.S., there's a lot of problems that come up where businesses will have something defamatory posted against them, and they'll think it isn't going to harm them, and then they'll wait 18 months and decide that they're going to go do something about that legally. And in most U.S. states, the statute of limitations is 12 months. But my belief on that is if you're anywhere near the statute of limitations and you're a real organization, you've really messed up, because that is costing you money, or it's costing you somehow, some way, probably in a fairly large way, every single day. So most of these things for real organizations with real revenues, you need to deal with them on the matter of days or weeks, as opposed to having to worry about statute of limitations.
Okay.
Well, one of the other things in that, Agnes, is that a lot of this evidence, because of the nature of the people that are utilizing the tools they're using, and also the places that they're using to perform their attacks, that evidence is perishable, and so that evidence doesn't stay around long. And so even if you try to subpoena it, if you don't get preservation orders out to preserve that evidence. And so, for instance, if a Google account gets closed out, then, within basically 30 days, all that evidence is gone if you haven't preserved that evidence. So there's a lot of strategy that comes into play that way as well.
Wow. Bruce, would you have anything to add in terms of biggest mistakes that you see organizations make?
I think I go along with Chris, and that regardless of the type of attack, is that the sooner you take steps to at least arm yourself with what your options are, even if you're not ready to move yet, to understand, what can you do, how can you stop it, and how should you go about it, and get advisement, because ultimately, if they wait too long, it can spin out of control, as Chris was saying, very, very quickly. Or you can lose evidence, or you can make some huge missteps that may destroy your case in the process. And so we highly recommend people get professional advisement before they decide what they're going to do.
And I would add to that, just for everybody listening, is start thinking about this now. Start thinking if you're interested, or if you are listening and going, holy crap, we never thought about that. Or, hey, yeah, we saw this happen to somebody, in the industry or a competitor or whatever it may be, somebody we know. And we never really thought about what is involved in this. Get in touch with, Chris, Bruce, people like them that can have answers and help you prepare in advance. And people who listen know that I'm all about, crisis prevention is the best form of crisis management. And that is how you're going to respond as quickly as possible and take the right measures as quickly as possible right from the get-go. And that being said, so I think a big question that organizations ask, marketing and PR departments, they're monitoring social for activity and activity around their campaigns and this and that. But the sooner an organization realizes that they're in some way, shape, or form under attack online, the sooner they realize it and the sooner they get in touch with people like you to take the right steps, the better it is for them. And you guys have been saying that throughout this entire conversation. So a lot of organizations probably think that they're monitoring or think that it's under control because their marketing or PR teams are doing it. They're monitoring social media. I think that most organizations, or a lot of organizations, don't really understand that it's not just about monitoring social, it's about monitoring the web as a whole. So two questions. One, what tips and advice do you have for them on this? And two, do you guys offer some form of help in reputation monitoring?
Okay. So as far as tips, the number one tip is figure out which of the three modes impacts you reputationally. So there's three ways that people get hurt on the internet as far as reputation and brand. One being is when you search your brand name, your company name, or even your executives' names. Number two is, especially if you're a local company, is you may be subject to reviews, local reviews, Yelp, RateMD for physicians, on and on and on. And then the third is in social. So if you get customers by people looking at reviews, or even if you're a local company and there's reviews about you, is you better be monitoring that piece. For everybody, every organization they need to be monitoring their brand or brands, plural, name. And that can be as simple as, somebody designated in the organization where they're looking, they do a search on Google and Bing and maybe Yahoo every day and look 2-3 pages deep, or you go hire somebody to do that for a few bucks. The second thing is, and this depends on the nature of the organization, is that somebody in your organization that is doing that looking and making that decision, they're playing a crucial role. So they see something out there. So let's say they see a little blog out there and they go, and they're not used to seeing all the bad stuff. And they go, yeah, okay, that's just a blog post. No big deal. Gee, there's probably nobody even looks at that blog. That is a huge decision that they just made. So for example, is we have had cases that have hit the national news, world news actually, that started out as simple as that, and somebody made the decision that blogger wasn't terribly important. Turned out that in one particular case, that blogger was tied to a hacktivist group called Anonymous.
Oh, wow.
And they didn't know. So what they have to do, and it's no different, I don't think, in your world, Melissa, is whoever's making those decisions, you better trust them. if you have a lot of stake in your organization. And yes, just so you know, CIS offers. We do a lot of different monitoring for a lot of different customers. To date, most of the monitoring that we do is customized, where we're hunting stuff on an hourly, daily, weekly basis. We're getting ready in a couple months to introduce some monitoring lines where we're going to cover just regular organizations very simply and doing Google, Yahoo, Bing types of searches for them.
Very cool. And I would see that because maybe people are thinking, well, Google Alerts does that, so I'm covered. I do. I have Google Alerts signed up, or, I'm covered for that stuff. What's the difference?
Okay. And it's a great question. So Google Alerts, if everybody doesn't know, is you should absolutely sign up for Google Alerts. It's free. And what it does theoretically is anytime new material is found by Google that contains the search term that you specify, then it alerts you. But that isn't necessarily, that is useful, but the part that you need to worry about is the part that your customers or anybody that you care about is going to see when they go search your name. So, for example, if I'm going to look at Agnes Day, what's anybody going to do is they're going to Google that name. And what shows up in the first couple of pages is a big deal, but because the search engines change on a regular basis, is all of a sudden sitting on page 1 may be something terrible that you didn't even know existed. And so if you're not aware of that, but your future clients are, then that's a very bad thing. And Google Alerts just 100% is not set up to be able to see that.
Especially because, and to help people understand maybe a little bit further, Google Alerts might alert you when that, whatever that something terrible is, comes out for the first time, but it won't tell you when the algorithms change and it starts appearing on the first page.
Correct. So we've had damaging material show up on companies 2 years after it was posted, and the company wasn't aware of it, even though they were using Google Alerts. And then all of a sudden, Google changed their algorithm, and it literally showed up on page 1. And the first they knew about it was some customer finally, or potential customer, clued them in and say, "Look, I can't use your service because of this." And then they finally went and Googled themselves and went, "Oh my gosh,
how did that get there?"
Yeah, exactly.
And that's a risk that every single organization, as well as personal brand, professional, is vulnerable to, just because we don't have control over search engine algorithms.
That's very true. Very true.
So I've seen cases where an organization is attacked online, and so you mentioned that a lot of the first knee-jerk reaction is to dial in the organization's attorney. I've seen cases where the professionals within the organization actually go to their local police station to say, "Hey, this is what's happening. This is a crime. It's happening online," and turn to them for help. And in the cases I've seen, they kind of get laughed at because law enforcement just doesn't know what to do. They're not prepared. It's not part of their job description to deal with the whole online side of things. So I guess I have a two-part question. First is, do you guys work with law enforcement on different cases or different types of risk and situations? And second, do you think that it's something that will become part of law enforcement mandate, or do you think it's something that should be part of it? Or what kind of advice, or if you had to say something to, I have a lot of law enforcement professionals that listen to my podcast, so what would you want them to know?
Bruce, you want to tackle that, given your background?
Yeah. Well, first, you're right, is that just about everywhere in the U.S. that we talk to law enforcement. And again, I am ex-law enforcement, so I understand how they think, and I've got a lot of working relationships with different agencies. We've got working relationships in cases that we've done, with the FBI. But for the most part, local law enforcement do not have the training, the manpower, the know-how, and for that matter, the backing of the district attorney of prosecution on a lot of these different types of cases. And so in private conversations and a lot of departments I've talked to is basically when they get these types of online cases, that they get swept under the rug, or they get reclassified as something else, and they really never get work. It's only if they have any kind of political clout or any political pressure, or if somebody's really being physically threatened or harmed or something real serious in that type of capacity, then they know how to deal with that, and they can respond. From the bureau side of it, they're involved in so many national security type things that would keep all of us up at night if we knew everything that they were doing. And they just don't have the time, unless it's a really serious case, for them to take it on. So it leaves people feeling like there's this huge void of, gosh, I went to the police, they laughed at me, they can't help me, they won't do anything. I went to my attorney, and he doesn't know much about this either. What do I do? And Chris and I both hear this every day. And that's really where our firm has come in, because a lot of times, if we can put together a case in a nice wrapped up red bow package and hand it to them, then they can work that. Then that's within the realms of what they know how to do. They can subpoena stuff. They can follow that type of stuff up. But you really have to get somebody's attention to be able to do it, and it has to really be put together for them already, because they just don't have the manpower, resources, tools to work it themselves.
Makes sense. Do you think that might change? Do you think that local law enforcement might eventually, and I know this is probably many years down the road, but have a department specializing or committed to these types of attacks?
You're seeing more and more departments, starting to give some kind of attention to this stuff, and they're, I'm hearing today, more stalking cases being taken by police departments than I was, 2 years ago. Is it where it needs to be? Nowhere close. But they are trying. What it's going to come down to is going to come down to training and budget, and where enough of this is going on that through state legislators and funding and federal funding, that they can now start to get specialty training in this type of stuff, similar to what they did with drugs and child pornography and those types of things.
Okay.
Let me aug that just a second, Melissa.
Yeah, go ahead.
Especially since you deal with organizations, there's really two types of legal issues that exist out there. So there are criminal issues, and then there are, at least in the U.S., what we call civil issues. And from a layman's perspective, is criminal is something you can get somebody arrested over, and civil is something that you can sue somebody over. So many of the things that happen out there are not even of a criminal nature. And it totally depends on the laws of wherever you're at. But for example, in the U.S., in the vast majority of the jurisdictions, is you could go and set up websites that are just trashing a company, and that's a civil issue, something that you can bring a lawsuit over, but absolutely not a criminal issue. So law enforcement is not going to touch that unless all of a sudden they pass laws that were criminal in nature to do that.
Which is something that's very important for organizations to realize and understand.
Right. Agree with that.
Absolutely. Chris, Bruce, this has been such an informative and insightful and important conversation. Is there anything that you'd like to add that we haven't touched on?
Bruce, anything you want to add?
I think we've kind of hit the spectrum.
Awesome. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Just one thing I'll add is that, and Bruce and I talk about this on a regular basis, is in the high-tech cyber world, is the rules change constantly. So a lot of the issues that Bruce and I deal with today didn't exist 5 years ago. Some of them didn't exist 2 years ago. And so as we face more and more high-tech world, cyber world, and who knows where it all goes, is these things are going to become more and more prevalent. So it's not something that I think that's going to go away for organizations. It's probably just going to become something where they really, or at some point, are going to have to focus on it.
I absolutely agree. It's unfortunate, but it's a reality.
Right. I agree with that.
So for everybody listening, where can they find and follow you guys?
As far as finding us, our website is www.cyberinvestigationservices.com. And you'll pretty much, if you forget all that, go type in cyber investigator and then a search, and we'll probably come up all over the place. As far as following us, and you're going to hate us, Melissa, but we're not, don't have a big presence out in social media. And so our website is our best place to go right now.
No, and your website has a ton of information, and you guys blog every once in a while on Agnes Day's Crisis Intelligence blog. So you may not have a big presence on social, but you're actually doing the work and helping organizations. And you're also, doing things like this with me, where we get to share your knowledge and help organizations start to better understand and prepare. And that's what counts. So your website and all your information will be below, or is below, this podcast, no matter where listeners may be listening to it from. So whether it's the Crisis Intelligence blog at agnesday.com, on iTunes, or Stitcher. And that said, thank you so much to the both of you for having this really great and important discussion with me.
Well, thank you for having us. We enjoyed it.
Yeah, well, thanks so much.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to this week's episode of the Crisis Intelligence Podcast. I release a new episode every Sunday, so if you haven't already done so, be sure to subscribe to the Crisis Intelligence Podcast over on the Crisis Intelligence blog at agnesday.com/blog, or on iTunes or on Stitcher. And while you're at it, head on over to iTunes and Stitcher, and would really appreciate it if you left us a review and your feedback. You can also follow me on Twitter at Melissa_Agnes. And if you'd like to reach out to me to ask me a follow-up question from this week or a past podcast, or if you'd like to discuss the possibility of having me come and speak at an upcoming event, then you could email me directly at magnes@agnesday.com. Thanks so much for tuning in this week, and I look forward to talking even more crisis intelligence with you next Sunday.